Thanks a lot again for joining this first panel and welcome to my presentation on the capabilities approach in the context of advancing human labor automation. I will first start off with introducing my research background and also the different perspectives I'm looking at advancing human labor automation. So in that sense, to also address the specific topics and dimensions I'm covering, which will be then the second part of my presentation today. Then I will introduce the capabilities approach and the way I'm looking at advancing human labor automation and how I'm evaluating the different developments that are ongoing. And the final piece of my presentation will be giving a high-level extract and overview on ethical risks and opportunities of advancing human labor automation and also policy implications that are required specifically to be able to harvest the benefits of human labor automation and counter the risks that are arising from these developments. So firstly about myself and how my research interests grew and also where I'm coming from and where I'm heading. So I've been working in automation and cybersecurity at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Switzerland, where I have been leading the implementation of a major automation platform, which aimed to equip the workforce with automation technology to reduce repetitive tasks and to release working hours, so people would have a lesser time that they would require for a certain task. These kind of developments I'm currently evaluating in an academic field from an ethical standpoint to evaluate them and then also subsequently receive policy-related answers. Since I'm also involved into Swiss politics, that's also then finishing up the cycle of evaluation and gaining insights on what we should do specifically from a policy standpoint and receive ethical guidance essentially for policy to deal with these specific issues and questions. So what are the three key dimensions I'm addressing and covering in my research? So of course, on the one hand, you would have strong effects and consequences on the labor market caused by advancing human labor automation. So productivity increases, so you would have more output per worker, so you would be able to produce more products, to also deliver more services with having fewer people employed. So this is leading to a lower demand for labor in general, and also results then in a strong redistribution from labor to capital. And this can be illustrated by, for example, the fact that in the 90s, if we consider the Detroit area with having its major corporations being in automotive industries, the three major players at that point had a market capitalization of around 36 billion while employing over 1.4 million people. And just 25 to 30 years later, if we look at the Silicon Valley, where the three major corporations have a market capitalization of over $1 trillion, while just employing around 130,000 people, we can strongly see that it is more and more possible to receive more capital with having fewer people employed, which also leads to a strong accumulation of capital in the hands of very few people and very few corporations, essentially, which do no longer need to employ people in order to be productive and gain more capital. So this is like one strong key dimension I'm covering in my research. So a second one is, of course, also that automation technologies increasingly affect those who are still in the labor market. So they are more and more subject to be influenced by automated decision making, some sort of let's say this resource distribution, information distribution is increasingly influenced by algorithms. And also, since robots take over more and more work, they increasingly become competitors of humans, of those who still are in the labor market, and also increasingly therefore face pressure of becoming more and more efficient, because their competitor of the machine, of course, doesn't require let's say human goodies such as vacations or health insurance, essentially. So this is like a second aspect of my research. So a third dimension I'm also covering is the increased usage of automation technologies to harvest private data, and where people are specifically encouraged to spend more time on the screens, which is specifically relevant in terms of social media. So people through algorithms and automation technologies are encouraged to spend as much time as possible and give up as much private data as possible, in their aim of just working on their so-called selfhood. Now, selfhood is what we all need as humans. We try to identify ourselves. We work on our on our picture towards our peers. We communicate with our closest relatives, and data gathered from this kind of work, this creativity, time, and so on and so forth, we dedicate to social media, and in that sense, to our selfhood, is gathered and traded without remuneration. So this is also one form, a new form of human labor that is arising with automation technologies, and is also encouraged by technology corporations, of course, which in that sense leads to some sort of a data slavery, of course. So these are the three dimensions I'm covering mainly in my project. Of course, there's also like new forms of work such as the gig economy and so on and so forth that have other implications. So how am I looking at these different developments? So the capabilities approach has been evolved over the past decades and developed by Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize laureate and Harvard professor, and provides an alternative approach to human welfare. Classically, economics started to, especially in the 20th century and also in the last years increasingly, to only look at on quantitative numbers when measuring well-being and human welfare. For example, global domestic project, gross domestic product, GDP, or unemployment rates, for example, which are like the classical indicators of measuring economic welfare. So the capability approach provides an alternative, focusing on looking at what are people able to achieve in their lives and what are they doing. I won't go that much into the details of the capabilities approach, but just will give a quick introduction. And the capability approach basically sees it as a goal of providing and enabling human beings a life with human dignity, and using developments and using policy as also an instrument to provide a meaningful existence with equal human dignity of all human beings. And in that sense, also, these basic capabilities, they're not only aiming at ranking living standards but also it can be seen as some sort of a minimal standard in how an individual should be able to live a life with human dignity. And I mean, one of the known examples that led where the capability approach was a foundation is the Human Development Index. So this approach I'm pursuing in my research in order to also from an ethical standpoint make sure that we enable a life with human dignity in terms or in the context of advancing human labor automation. Also then to find answers what kind of policy measures are relevant to enable these different capabilities, which are part of the approach. So what are some sort of the ethical risks of advancing human labor automation? And of course, one of them is there is a growing number of individuals that is not able to receive an income to live a dignified life. And this is specifically relevant since for large parts of humanity, just accessing basic nutrition is dependent on employment. And this is also especially relevant in terms of with increasing competition between humans and machines. Of course, the machine is always cheaper, which also affects not only, let's say, individuals who receive a high salary or are based in let's say, the global north, but also increasingly affect those in the global south, since the machine is always small, always more efficient and also cheaper. So you would have more and more also jobs, for example, where robots can be controlled from abroad, maybe from the global north or from a specific place where you would have lower taxes or also more in a different regulatory environment, and you would be able to produce in the global south by machines, while not paying not even paying wages in these countries. So there are a lot of implications in the long term with automation, which is leading to a lack of employment in basically all parts of the world. And also advancing automation leads to new ways of working. New ways of working would be, for example, the gig economy, a flexibilization of work, where you would only need humans when really required, for example, and the rest would be done by machines. So you would be basically able to just hire someone for very little work or just an unsubstantial amount, which would then also, well, some sort of make a life with human dignity impossible, because the wage would not be sufficient, which is gathered from these different new ways of working as part of, for example, the gig economy, or other new forms of working, and also as part of the shared economy, of course. And also, and of course, an ethical risks in terms of which also then, of course, relates to more of a democracy-related questions and so on and so forth, is that information distribution is increasingly based on algorithms and opaque algorithms. So we no longer have the full scale of information. We just receive information where there's some sort of mechanisms behind that we don't know what mechanisms are really decisive on how we receive information. And this, of course, also affects resource distribution, since artificial intelligence and machine learning increasingly also, even if humans would take the decisions, these decisions are heavily influenced by algorithms and information based on these kind of technologies. So on the one hand, well, as I said, resource distribution. There are institutions that already base their judgments just on data gathered and algorithms and artificial intelligence, without actually knowing what are the mechanisms behind. And this is, I think, also a high risk in terms of when it comes to enforcing, for example, political rights, when it comes to accessing public services, for example. Well, algorithms could decide on what kind of court cases are prioritized, or what kind of groups or within a society would receive prime access to public services, for example, by also automating street clerks, as it would be called in literature. And I think these are all like ethical risks, which also make it more difficult for people to express themselves, to affiliate, because their political decision making and their influence in democracy is increasingly becoming dominated by algorithms that move them towards one direction or the other based on opaque algorithms behind. On the other side, there are, of course, ethical opportunities with automation. And I mean, education, literacy, of course, plays a very important role in all these aspects. Also, to become aware of how artificial intelligence, how the systems they all work. So automation also is able to grant new ways of learning, of receiving know-how, of receiving skills from people that are not even like, let's say, there are no geographic limits to receiving education nowadays, which is probably an advantage over how it was before. But of course, also there are certain things that need to be considered, such as the standardization process, which is also making it different than in terms of how to judge information that you receive through education, where the mechanism is not also clear behind, again, the knowledge you receive and the information. Nevertheless, I think in that sense, it gives more opportunities to an individual to receive know-how and skills. And what is really an opportunity that is important is the access to medicine. So medical services in general, such as diagnosis and so on, they go through strong standardization standardization processes, which leads to lower costs. And this could also improve accessibility to certain medical services that were not available to large parts of individuals before. So in that sense, we have also another opportunity. And also, of course, automation. If we give automation tools and education of how to use these tools, which would be then still operated by a human, we would have more cognitive work that is done by humans, less repetitive tasks, and which would lead to reduced working hours, in the sense that also these tasks that would be repetitive, that would cause a lot of loss in time, would be done increasingly then by artificial intelligence. So what are the policy implications from this development to use these technologies, to use these opportunities, so people are still able to live a life with human dignity? and also to counter these specific developments. So on the one hand, what is really crucial are social assistance schemes. And I think that we really need to have a certain switch in how this policy is affected. I mean, there's a big difference, of course, between the US and Europe in terms of having an existing safety net, the social safety net. And I think that is pretty much also visible if you look at how workers think about automation. If you would compare Europe to the US, in Europe, if you ask a mining worker or an agriculture worker how he thinks about or how he or she thinks about automation, they would be more relaxed because they know if a robot will take over their job, they would have a social assistance scheme, a social safety net that would help them get back on track, so they wouldn't like lose all of their benefits they have. They wouldn't lose access to healthcare immediately. They wouldn't have to live under a bridge or essentially lose all their means to provide for their families and so on and so forth. Whereas in the U.S., all of these things are subject to be endangered if a robot will take over the specific job. And I think that's also so as an employee or a worker in the US, you will have a strong interest in actually working against AI and not embracing the possibilities, because all of your benefits, basically your whole life, and if you have no savings, your whole existence depends on your specific job. So I think in that context, the social safety net is absolutely crucial in order to harvest the benefits from automation. And of course, this will require certain additional policy measures. So there might be that the fact or the development or also the consequence that there would be a need to spend more on social assistance schemes in the long term. And this needs to be also financed by a revision of the tax system. The problem with the tax system we have is that it taxes labor. And by taxing wages, we do not really consider the productivity raises that we see through automation. So we will need new taxation forms like a digital tax or a robot tax in order to make sure that also the government spending is not becoming increasingly reduced if there are fewer and fewer people employed, which would of course then also lead that the government revenue would decrease if we proceed with the same tax system that focuses on labor taxation. And in that sense, we need new approaches, whether that is in a progressive tax or increasingly also in digital tax, wealth tax, or robot tax, essentially, where companies would need to pay for the productivity gains that they receive through automation technologies. And the third point, which from my perspective is also important, is technology governments. I called for a ban of artificial intelligence for social media in one of my recent publications. And I think in that sense, we need to start, on the one hand, banning the deployment of certain application of artificial intelligence, because they don't bring any benefits to society and humanity, which are leading to, as in the case of private data and social media, to a data slavery. And there we need restrictions on how these tools are used. And also we need to have a transparency on how these technologies work. So in that sense, the legislative answer has been not sufficient so far, and therefore there needs to be a clear policy guidance and governance guidance that either algorithms are transparent or they're heavily restricted in their use. And of course, in that sense, also taxation could bring back certain control over how technology is used, and could also support then like both ends, also the structuring of how a social assistance scheme should look like in the context of automation, how it should be financed essentially. So yeah, that's basically my input. Thanks a lot for your attention. If you have